Пердащими! Вон он, сука! Вон он! Полиция! Ну где? Я обещал. Гнида! Шалава! Убить! Давай, Максим! Чего, блядь?
Левый коронный, правый коронный.
Вот он!
Вон он, блядь, ебашь его!
ты говно! Да вот он! Ты где? Чё, обосрался? Страшно, да? Вон он, упырь! Вот он! Ну где ты, а? Вон он!
lend itself quite well to
It
working
does.
from home.
Absolutely, it does. Strangely, in both in a professional sense, but also how is our mental health. And what we found was that people who are single, and single guys actually, are struggling more than anyone else. We had quite a high percentage of people who are finding it okay working from home. Some love it, some hate it. But the ones who are struggling the most are young single guys because they're inside their own head too much.
I can imagine that, because if you're working at home, living at home, you might even not have the space to do that. You're working in your living room and your bedroom. It's like you never then escape work. And
That's a very valid point, right? But we're probably about a month in. We actually, again, did a survey to find out how people coping. What was your working environment? Actually sitting in a chair so you're not cutting your back. And we found there was a number of great expense to provide. And distributed people's
well, there is that side of the health, and there is the mental health aspects as well, as you say, because
mental
you do need human contact. You can't just work in a little box forever. You've got to see people, and many people, their whole friends, their social network is around people they work with.
Yeah, I totally agree. I find that I'm personally myself, I hate working from home, but we just have to do it. I think it was just about 8 weeks into it. He took the decision. He drove through to Edinburgh and stayed with his sister. He didn't spend any more time.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Mark. Thank you very much for that. Really interesting. 973 if you want. Earlier we talked about the legal side of it as well, and I'm joined by employment barrister Daniel Barnett from Outer Temple Chambers. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, Clive.
So, just a couple of legal questions about working from home. First of all, are you forced to go back to the workplace?
There is no simple yes or no answer. There's so many categories here. First and foremost is
Да вот!
work from the office. That's the default. However, if it's not safe to work from the office, health and safety laws by forcing you to go back. And more significantly, if you reasonably believe that you're in serious, imminent danger by going back to work, and that can include from transport as well as the actual workplace itself, then you have a legal right to stay at home and not be fined for doing so. However, there's doubt, nobody really knows the answer to this, about whether staying at home is paid or unpaid. I think it's unpaid. There's a lot of lawyers who think differently.
Yeah!
But that won't be for a couple of years.
So people who have been shielding, say, for the last few months, but working from home at the same time, if their employer says, well, now the time has come, you've got to come back to work, and they really feel uncomfortable, they feel they're in danger, we don't really know whether they've got a case or not. That's going to have to be tested in the courts.
That's right, but if they have been working comfortably from home for a while, and they've worked for at least 2 years, they have another argument as well, which is that it's a breach of the term of trust and confidence to force somebody to come into home, assuming they can do the job, to come into work, assuming they can do the job properly from home. and they could, in theory, resign and claim constructive dismissal. But it would be a brave employee who does that, because they'd be without any salary for the year or more it would take to get the place to a good renewal.
What about around the other way? Can an employer insist that you do work from home?
Again, this depends on what the contract says. Most modern contracts say we can require you to work within a reasonable distance of the office, which will almost always cover working from home. And if it says that, then unless there's a compelling reason why they can't work from home, the employer is going to be acting reasonably in invoking that clause and saying, I want you to work from home. Now, the sorts of things that might prevent somebody from working from home are there might be health issues at home. For example, they might have to look after an elderly relative, and the very fact of working from home might cause problems. I'm thinking, for example, about a job that might involve loud talking on the phone, a salesperson, for example, and you might have an unwell relative who needs a quiet place to rest. But that's going to be a fairly narrow exception. The most common reason why employers might not want an employee to work from home is data protection and similar issues. If the individual doesn't have sufficiently secure IT, the employer could find that there are inadvertent breaches of data protection laws.
Are there any other legal risks to working at home? I mean, what if you have an accident, for example, while you're working? Is that your employer's fault or your fault because it's your home?
Well, it's something that people have talked about quite a lot. I think the risk is overstated. An employer has an obligation to take reasonable care to make sure your workplace is safe. Now, if they say to you, is your workplace safe? And you say, yes, my home is safe, that's probably going to be enough. There's a couple of tiny exceptions. For example, there are more active obligations to check the safety if the employee is a pregnant woman. But leaving those limited exceptions aside, the employer is entitled
Already
to
saying they are going to make the masks compulsory in schools, although Clive, not in the classroom, but in areas like corridors and canteens. As I say, the change in messaging, the change in tone from the government in England in the last 24 hours would not would hardly quell rumours, shall we say, that a new term on this is coming.
Ben, thanks very much indeed. And as Ben was saying there, Scotland has announced that secondary school pupils will have to wear face coverings in corridors, communal areas and school buses from next Monday. The new rules will apply to all pupils over the age of 12. Dr. Philippa Whitford joins us now, SNP Health spokesperson, SNP MP for Central Ayrshire. Philippa, good evening to you.
Hi there.
So how is this going to work then?
Well, I think it's relatively clear and straightforward that young people in secondary school will wear masks, particularly in the common areas. As our young people have been back at school since the 11th of August, it's become clear that it is harder to maintain social distancing in secondary schools where pupils are moving between specialist classes, etc. So the Scottish Government were already considering whether this might be something useful. And of course, in the meantime, the WHO in the last few days have come out and actually advised for those
Is it that useful, though, if you're just wearing them in corridors and once you're there, you take them off?
Well, obviously, in other countries like Germany, etc., the pupils are actually wearing them in corridors. Pupils are usually more spaced out. They're sitting down, often they're all facing the same way. They're not jostling around in the same way they are in corridors. Now, it has been commented that if you were in an area with a very high incidence, so if you had a big outbreak going on in a city, you might actually then advise that they were wearing them all the time. But it is the case that obviously it will reduce communication, it will muffle voices. Some children might find that difficult, but equally, some children might find that reassuring. They may feel safer with a mask on. So the advice, the guidance is it needs to be worn in the common areas and it needs to be worn on the buses. It's not being pushed within the classroom because we think the other methods of social distancing and hygiene are contributing there. But that may change. There isn't a handbook for COVID. You know, all the governments are having to feel their way forward. But In England, the schools are not yet open. So for next week, we'll have been back for 3 weeks. And therefore, there is the opportunity to look at what's been happening to schools in Scotland and to learn from that.
And are you hoping Boris Johnson
Вот
will
ниндзя
learn
ебаный.
from that? What do you make of his stance at the moment?
Well, obviously, he seems to have moved quite a lot within, just a matter of a day. So I think probably they will. I mean, Scotland was the first to introduce it in shops, and then England followed a couple of weeks later. All four nations have got to find their way through these things. Both health and education are devolved, so it is up to the Prime Minister and the First Ministers to make these decisions. But it does make sense to actually learn from each other. That could have been done around the exams debacle, but instead we had mockery of Scotland. In this case, don't mock Scotland. To look at, have a look at that. If it's useful information, maybe that will influence the government in Westminster.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Philippa Whitford, the SNP Health spokesperson. Now, there are concerns about these new rules. Many people are calling for careful and detailed
Тройся, пацаны!
guidance being provided about how children can wear face coverings safely in school. Eileen Pryor is Executive Director at Connect, a charity supporting partnerships in education, also known as the Scottish Parent Teacher Council. Eileen, good evening to you.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you for joining us. So, how comfortable are you with this advice on wearing masks in schools?
I think over the last few weeks, it's just become obvious that this was the direction of travel. We have some concerns, and I would make the point that you can always find someone to back up your beliefs. There's always someone there with evidence or science to back you up. So there are those who are saying that wearing a mask in school is necessary. Productive, and of course there are those who are saying it's helpful and positive. I'm not a medical expert, but I would say that there are parents on both sides of those arguments, and we would simply raise the point that they have to ensure that young people are using facial coverings properly, that they have the opportunity, that they're given the help to use them properly, so that they don't actually become a negative and a risk in terms of spreading not just COVID but anything, any viruses. And we also have concerns about the fact that some people, of course, can't wear facial coverings. Young people with additional support needs, or those with respiratory illnesses and so on. So we have to be sure that who don't wear masks, and in fact, we know that happens in the world outside school. So we have to be particularly careful that young people who can't wear a facial covering are not in any way pinpointed for that.
And you're comfortable with the overall guidance, the message from Boris Johnson and the government, it's safe, and children should be back at school. There's not much to worry about. You're in more danger just travelling there.
Yeah, well, bear in mind that education is a devolved matter, and so it's our First Minister and our Education Minister that we would listen to. As your previous speaker said, there's no handbook on this. We are learning as we go along, and for sure we're not getting it right all the time, and we're developing our plans and our actions as we see the impact. The important thing is that children are back at school, and if you talk to most parents, they are absolutely delighted, and they're saying they can see a huge change in their young people and children being back at school. It's a positive thing for them. That's the prime thing. We then have to keep them safe and happy within that environment. So there's a lot of work, I think, to be done around communication with families, with young people, and schools developing their plans together with their families and young people, so that everyone understands how this is going to play out and how decisions will be made and communicated. Because it will change, as time goes along, as we understand better how this virus is actually behaving.
Eileen, thank you very much for joining us. Eileen Pryor there from Connect. Well, now, there's clearly different rules in different parts of the country, as we've been hearing, and following Scotland's action today, the Welsh Government announced that they will also be reviewing whether children should wear face coverings in schools. LBC's Mike Hughes has the latest from Cardiff.
Well, the time has come now where the Welsh Government clearly feel that this needs to be looked into, because a lot of the decision-making around this spans several different departments, education obviously, when it comes to the likes of school buses, then transport needs to be involved, and of course health, then there will be lots of discussions going on throughout the day. The move by the Scottish Government on Monday came 2 weeks after children had already returned to the classroom. Schools are yet to reopen in Wales for the new term, and Vaughan Gethin says that if there is going to be a change either in policy or guidance, then he wants that in place before the week is out.
Trying to jump ahead 2 or 3 steps to what the consequences may or may not be, we actually need to have the advice